John, alcoholic.
Hey, John.
Let's try to get recentered. I'm sure you guys have heard this prayer, a couple different versions of it. It's called the set-aside prayer. If you haven't, steal it and act like you made it up. So we can just get still in our seats for a second and remember why we're here. And God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about my disease. Please help me set aside everything I think I know about my recovery. Please help me set aside everything I think about you, God. And please open my heart to a new experience about my disease, a new experience with my recovery, and a new experience with you. Amen.
Amen.
Thought he was taking the mic already. Scott's back. According to Tommy's schedule, we're already a session behind. I love talking 4 and 5, and we're not going to get into doing this work together. And I want to, before I turn it over to Scott, to me, there's a real danger in what I've been trying to communicate and been talking with some of the guys. For me, in institutionalizing this work and making this work systematic. I can't do a perfect 4-step, which is why I didn't do it for such a long time, right? I mean, because if I can't be the best, I'm not playing. That's just how it works. And really, that was obviously just all fear-based. But, for me, this journey into the 4-step is the beginning of the second half of my life. I follow this guy, not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but one of my spiritual teachers, and he talks about there's 2 halves of life, and I think I talked about it a little bit last night. The first half of life is when we're building this container that we're going to live in. Our degree, our house, our wife, our, all the trappings, going to the gym, we're building up our container, our image, our all that stuff. And somewhere in that fails, right? The world's trappings become not enough. And sometimes it happens as soon as we get sober, right? And we have this surrender of a 3rd step depth and weight that carries us through. Didn't happen for me. I think a lot of that, as I described last night, is age. But when I finally got to the 3rd step for me was getting to the end of myself, right? Like that's really what it is. Being exhausted in self. The self doesn't work. And this journey into 4 is starting the second half of life, right? What am I going to put in this container? Which of course is about developing a relationship with God. And this part of relieving what's blocking me from God in the 4th step is obvious. I know there's just tons of advanced AA guys in here, so I'm not going to beat you with the details, right? Our inventory is a resentment inventory, a fear inventory, and a sex inventory. Scott doesn't like to call it that, but that's what it is, right? And develop this new ideal, which was huge for me. When I went back through this work with that amount of time, it wasn't the resentments that was getting me, it was the fear. In and of myself, by myself, under my own power, 27 years sober, 27 days sober, I am a fearful man, fear-driven man. It gets me every time with these things. I woke up this morning, I said, geez, we have 4 sessions. How are we going to talk for 4 sessions? And then like 5 minutes into it, I'm like, Scott, would you shut up? It's my turn to talk. We literally did this in Calgary, and they had us do 9 sessions on a Saturday. That's how sick they are up in Calgary. 9 sessions. And I thought, there's no way we're going to be able to talk for 9 hours. And we literally like, hey, can we get 1 more session tonight? We got some more to talk about. And but it was all about fear, right? Fear she doesn't love me. Fear my marriage isn't going to work. Fear it is going to work. Then what do I do? But for me, this process in 4 is don't worry about doing a perfect four-step. Don't worry about, I don't think there's a bad inventory. I don't think there's a bad inventory. And that's what kept me floating for a long time in AA, with some bad inventories. But when I actually did the inventory, which is, as I said, divinely designed by God to relieve what's blocking me from God. I don't know how Scott wants to go into 4, but for me, I want to talk a little bit about sponsorship, because I can't do this by myself. I tried doing 4 by myself, and my first couple experiences with 4 was I had 18 months sober. My life was completely a mess, as I told you right before I enlisted. And I went over to my sponsor's house, and this guy, a dozen years sober, and I said, man, I'm just, my life is a mess. I'm still, completely unmanageable, intolerable, unbearable at 18 months. He says, all right, we need to do the 4-step. I said, okay, great, let's do it. And we went in his room, and he said, we made a list of, he had 12 questions for me, and I answered them. He said, all right, that's your 4-step. And I said, okay. And I wasn't reading the book. I took his word for it. And, some time went on, and shockingly, I didn't get it much better. And a couple years goes by, I got 5 years sober, the wife leaves, and I decided, all right, maybe really now I should check out this big book thing they're talking about. And I had gotten a sponsor that, his name was Charles. He's the guy that picked me up walking home from that meeting I described. And the beauty that happened to me in this process was that him and I were exactly the opposite. He was short. He was African American. As I told you, he was super old at that time. He was 50. He was very well educated. He was very wealthy. Had his stuff together. We were complete opposites. And every time I would call him with the crisis of the day, blah 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 blah. I don't have any money. My electric's going to be cut off. My wife's leaving. I don't have any money. My car's broken. He'd say, John, my experiences when I actually worked the 4th and 5th step out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, my life got a whole lot better. I suggest you try it. All right. That's great. But, I don't have any money. My wife's really upset at me. My electric's being turned off, And, it was just like listening to Charlie Brown's teacher. And then he'd drop the big one on me, be like, all right, I just talked to Rick. He needs a ride to the meeting. Go pick him up and take him to the meeting, And that's, all I could do for a long time. And that was the level of instruction I got from him on my 4-step. So I said, all right, he told me the instructions were in the book, and I'd heard you guys talk about resentment. So I went home and I made a list of my resentments. And this AA club had a list of character defects on the wall. And so I figured I'd make a list of my character defects and write some examples of where they applied in my life. And that was, my first really 4-step. I didn't know that the instructions were in there. I'm not the guy that's going to ask. I'll sit in a corner dying of thirst, before I ask somebody for a glass of water. And that half measures 4th and 5th step held me for a while, right? It was the best I had. And then I went and did this 5th step with him, and the magic happened. Even with, my first 4-step was not searching and fearless. It was shallow and cowardly, right? But it was great. And we went and did this 5th step, and he shared with me his story, and I shared with him my story, and it happened. I finally really knew I belonged in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was walking on cloud 9. I walked out of his house, and I knew walking out of that house that Jesus was going to be sitting outside in a brand new Mercedes for me. Just, here it is. You've done the work, right? I knew when I got to my home group, the balloons were going to come out of the sky with the confetti, and they were going to put my story in the big book. So don't let a bad 4-step prevent you from doing it. And what happens, we'll talk more about 5 later, but I know Scott Stein will talk about 4. Go ahead.
Scott Lee, alcoholic.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, we agreed before we started he would talk about 4, but that's fine. I'll be glad to pick it up from here. Gifts from some of my teachers. I was told that all that garbage in my past is not who I am. That's who I'm not. Because that really is who I am. I'm still out there doing it. It doesn't make me sick to think about some of it. What I'll be taught here is how to stop doing who I'm not. How to repair the damage for having already done who I am not. And who I really am will emerge from the ashes like the phoenix. That's precisely what this thing is about. Another gift from a friend of mine. God forgives me for everything I ever did. And he loved me while I was doing it. My God got bigger that day. I hope yours just did. I found the source of all of my anger. I know where it all comes from. It comes from being right. I've never been angry when I wasn't also right. I've been right when I wasn't angry. Never been angry when I wasn't right. And right implies judgment. I read a book by a chaplain of an insane asylum one time, and he said that he polled the inmates one time. And he asked them, would you rather be right or would you rather be free? And overwhelmingly, the inmates in the asylum said they would rather be right. You know, when I was crazy, I would have rather been right too. Today, I would rather be free. And I found out that those are, in fact, opposites. I'm talking a little bit about what I do with a new guy with a four-step. And I just tell him very simply that you have my permission to do a lousy four-step. Because if you have to do it perfectly, you can't do it at all. So just get in there and do a rotten one. And that'll be just good enough for now. Let's get it started. And I tell him that we're not saving a special alcove in Akron at the AA Hall of Fame for your four-step. And in fact, our home group does not give a trophy every year for the best four-step. And this is the trophy you are not going to get. You can have your photo made with this at the next break. The four-step trophy's been all over the world. For those who are too far back, it says four-step trophy, never awarded. This is a trophy you ain't getting. And this is all about giving me the mindset that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly as I learn to do it. So that flies in the face of what I've been told all my life. Just get in there and do a rotten one. And let's get what we can get and move on. I'm going to skip some detail and move on down the middle of page 64. It says, first we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. So there's the good news again. I'm the problem. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestation. This is my current understanding of an overview of step 4. It is a series of lists, observations, or considerations and prayers about 3 specific aspects of self, which are resentment, fear, and sexual misconduct. And so it consequently breaks down into about 9 separate pieces. I actually count about 26 directions in the book. And I feed them a single direction at a time to my new guy. It's a very easy way. Step 4 is probably the easiest step we have. A little bit on the long side, it's real easy. There's no surprise in it like you weren't there. Right? So it's not like we're going to find some stuff you don't know about. Maybe not. And so we look for directions. It says when dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. For me, that's not a direction. It's a very general description. They're going to tell me precisely how to set them on paper. It says we listed, all right, we listed resentments, we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. I now need a list of everyone and everything that's ever made you angry, ever. Erase the word resentment from your mind. That's not what it asked me for. Because you don't know if it's a resentment or not. You know you're supposed to not have any, so you're trying not to have them. Well, let's not worry about that. Let's just do what the book said. A list is a series of words and phrases that run down a page. I've never seen a horizontal list. They're vertical. And so before we find the second direction, we need to complete the first one. It's a new concept for many of us. I want to do it all at once. And a spiral notebook is an easy way to do it. In the inside cover, I suggest you write something like, this is my 4-step. If I catch you reading it, I will kill you and hide your body. Something subtle, but that carries your message. And then you're protected. Don't leave this thing laying around. Don't lay it. And so the first column, we're going to do a 4-column inventory, and the double page with a spiral in the middle is one page. The left-hand margin is the first column. You write a 1 up there, write a 2 of the center of the left-hand page, and the 3 and the 4 split the right-hand page. And I now need a list. I want you to sit prayerfully, ask God into this process, and I want you to do 30 to 45-minute sessions. I want about 3 a week. We'll talk about based on what your life looks like. I have to know something about his life. And if the guy has got a wife and 5 kids, he's working 2.5 jobs, I get a program for him. Guy's retired, single, wealthy, got a whole different program for him based on how much time he's got. I believe one of the principles is that recovery should not have a negative impact on any other aspect of my life, any other major aspect of my life. Should be inconvenient at times, no question. Better be, but not going to have a negative impact. He calls me every Sunday with this 4-step schedule. And Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is not a schedule. Monday, 9 p.m. to 9:45 p.m., that is a schedule. And you didn't know the kid had a little league game Saturday afternoon at 2 when you planned to work on it, so you slept that till 7 o'clock that night? I don't need a phone call on that. When I did my first 4-step, I gave myself the assignment of completing a 4-step. Bad mindset. puts me in perfect position to hate myself till it's done. Much, much better, much better to have the perspective of I'm going to work on this exactly as much as my sponsor thinks I need to this week. And I can feel good about myself while I'm in process. Because in process is as far as I think I'm ever going to get. You may complete, but I don't believe I ever will. He and I can agree, then that's wonderful. And sit for 5 minutes in prayer and meditation, and then start spitting them. I would need a list, and you write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. When you get to the bottom, do not write on the last line. Turn the page and write 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top and keep them coming. Just spit them. And it should be all of your family members. Election year should be at least one major political party and some of its major practitioners, probably a religion or two, some classmates and teachers. Trust me, just spit them. Those who got their driver's licenses out of Cracker Jacks boxes, put them down. Anything or anyone that's ever made you angry, even if you're sure you've already forgiven them, when in doubt, write it out. Let's put it down. When those slow down, when you can't seem to bring up the next one, the bottom of page 65 says we went back through our lives. That indicates a reverse chronology. Now, I like for him to puke them at first. But then when that slows down, just, all right, so I'm living here, and I'm living with her, and I work here, and this is my home group, and this is my church, and these are my other activities. But 3 years ago, I was living with, what was her name? And I lived here, and chronologically back through my life. We get the earliest memories, we're finished. Is it complete? Absolutely not. Doesn't need to be. It's as good as it can be. And then as you think of some others, you just add them. Direction 2 says we asked ourselves why we were angry. On page 65 under the cause, it says his attention to my wife. Told my wife and my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office. If you have him start with office, count backwards, he'll get that's 19 words. Count forward, they miss them. 19 words. Let's look, what did Brown do? Messed with his wife, told his wife about his girlfriend, trying to get him fired. He got 19 words. 19 is maximum. Contractions count as 2 words. We're not here to feed this resentment. You want to save 17 pages for your father, and the answer to your question is write one name, skip a line, and don't list anybody more than once. Because you're wanting to feed this resentment. That's not what we're here to do. And I tell them, too, if you've got somebody who's done more than Mr. Brown's done, call me. We'll talk about whether or not you can write the 20th word. I've never given up the 20th word. You wouldn't call me, would you? Just from what you've seen. Well, they don't either. And it's a summary. And left me for another guy. Screwed me in a business deal. Left me for another guy. High school football coach. Didn't play me as much as I deserved. Left me for another guy. There'll be patterns. You'll find them. And when he's completed column 1, then I give him direction of column 2. Completed 2. Column 3. 5-part multiple choice. Self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal sex relations. Some will get 1. Some will get 2 or 3. Some will get all 5. Some he may not be able to figure out. Skip it. Don't get a brain hernia trying to figure it out. Skip it. Call me. I'll tell you how it was self-esteem. Because that's going to be it. The self-esteem, I've done 25 or 6 of these in 32 years. And the first 23 of them, self-esteem was the big issue. The last 2, it's been security. It's just interesting observation of the changes. No? No. Really? Okay. So when he's finished column 3, we're going to get to the portion of this step. This is the part that really lights me up. This is where my life changed, is the actions between the 3rd and 4th columns. I think if you've only written the 4th step, you've missed it. It isn't the writing that has much effect. It is the observations and prayers that are life-changing. It says, nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So I asked him, were you thorough? Were you honest? All right. When we're finished, we considered it carefully. They're going to tell us how to consider it. This is part of step 4. It's the consideration. First thing apparent was that the world people are often quite wrong. We're not going to spend much time on that. The chances are you've been sitting on bar stools with the other great philosophers of our era covering this very topic. I think you've probably got this one. Moving right along. It is plain that life includes deep resentment, leads only to futility and unhappiness. I say, have you ever seen anybody who is happy, joyous, free, and full of deep resentment? Have you ever seen that combination? I've never seen to have you. All right, so you observe what they observed. To the precise extent that we print these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? Did you ever lay awake at night and hate them when you could have been sleeping? Did you sit in class and plan what you were going to do to them when you could have been listening? Did you squander to throw away without any hope of anything positive coming back? Did you squander hours? Is this true for you? The alcoholic whose hope, now tell me what my hope is, the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. Maintenance means 2 things. It means to maintain in the sense of not lose anything I've already got. It also, for me, means to maintain in the sense that I maintenance my like I maintenance my vehicle. Like I rotate the tires, I got the right pressure in them, I change the oil, that squirter thing has got the fluid in it, I vacuum it, I wash it. I maintenance my spiritual condition. I pray and meditate. I read spiritual literature. I carry meetings into correctional facilities and treatment centers. I sponsor some guys. I have a sponsor. I let people in traffic. I maintenance my spiritual condition in the same sense that I maintenance my vehicle. Through all of those wonderful things. That's just what we do. And it says maintenance and growth. Growth means that Scott's 2016 program might not get it in 17. That I can't ever think I've got the end of this because there is not an end. This business of resentment is infinitely grave. Infinitely grave! We just killed you. We're going to kill you 7 times on this page. We found that it is fatal. And I watched a guy in my home group who had, I talked to Jerry about it, who was his sponsor, and I said, why did he die? He and I had the same sobriety date within a month or two. We had the same home group where I saw him many times every week. We had the same sponsor, you. And he drove home from a meeting one night and pulled in the garage and dropped the door and left it running and took his own life sober a little over 2 years. Why am I still here and he's not? And he said he died of resentment. I could not get him to do a 4-step. And he died of resentment. And I thought about it. I've talked to others who knew this man. Every time you saw him, he could not wait to tell you what some SOB had just done to him. He was a perennial victim. And we're in the process of stepping out of the victim role. We have begun. For when harboring such feelings, not when having, I'm okay if I have a resentment. I don't think there's accidental language in this book. Harbor means to give a safe place to nurture. I'm okay if I have a resentment if I'm not harboring. We're going to talk about how to not do that. Shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. We drink again. Well, that's to drink is to. Yeah, we killed you again. If we were to live. All right, now, this part is only for the ones that want to live. Everybody else can take a short break. We just killed you again. If we were to live, we had to be afraid of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for us. A number of the words of this book have had a major meaning change in my lifetime, and brainstorm is one of them. About the time I'm told this book was being written, one of the most creative men of the 20th century sat his team around a table, and you'd have an idea, and it'd make you think of something, and you'd think of something, and you'd come up with what we used. And Walt Disney labeled his process brainstorming. It has absolutely nothing to do with the word brainstorm printed on this page. In a 1930s dictionary we looked up, brainstorm said transient, violent mental outburst. That's rage. So if you put that in context, there are 2 kinds of anger. There's the slow burn or the grouch, just and rage, the detonation, brainstorm. Hope that helped. Helped me a lot. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for us. They may be the dubious luxury for normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are, yeah, you died again. We turned back to the list for it held the key to the future. Well, you just died again. It was subtle this time. Does that mean if I don't find the key to the future, I don't have a future? Yes, you're dead. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Different from what? Well, the way we've looked at it so far has been through the eyes of the prosecuting attorney. We've got the guilty defendant, column 1. We've got what he did to our poor innocent victim, column 2. We've got column 3, how it affected our poor innocent victim. If I'm going to look at that from an entirely different angle, I'm going to have to cross the courtroom, sit at the defense table, and say, if I'd had his life, if my father had done to me what his father did to him in childhood, if I'd been fired as many times, if she had done that to me, if I had had the horrors that he had in his life, could I on my worst spiritual hair day have done what he did? I have to tell you the answer is yes. I could have done any of it. It's the beginning of the forgiveness process. We began to see this world as people really dominated us. I want my guy to take about 20 or 30 minutes and have a look. How did this stuff dominate you? Did you lay awake at night? Did you plan your life so you'd be around this guy that hurt you so you would know when he screwed up so you could tell everybody? Did you plan your life so you'd never be around him so he couldn't get you again? Do you at 73 years old still have a problem with authority figures because of the way your father beat you down? That's my story. Let's have a look at how this dominated you. In that state, the wrongdoers of others, fancied or real? Fancied? Does that mean something that just happened in my head? Yep, we'll find that. Had the power to actually kill. You know who died. How could we escape? Here's one of the most important observations in the book. We saw that these resentments must be mastered. Do you? This is a sales pitch. I've been a sales rep a long time. A good salesman will never mention price till he's established value. We just killed you 7 times. I hope that's a lot of value because the price is high on this one. It says we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. Bill alludes to something that I have discovered from my own experience. In the English language, the verb to forgive is transitive. It means it's something that I do, that I can give you this pen. That's transitive. But I find that for me, the verb to forgive is not transitive. It's passive. It's something I must receive. I can't forgive you. I don't have the power. It's something I have to receive. And see, I get here locked up like this. And what this process I'm about to describe did for me was it opened me up to receive the gift of not hating you anymore. If I hear somebody say, I forgive, but I'll never forget, that's not what forgive looks like. Forgive includes forget. And
I'm back.
did you have a good trip?
I left for about 20 minutes.
Did you have a good trip?
This part that's coming up in the work after the third column is what I missed for a long time. And I've done these 4-step workshops all over the country, and I've had people come up to me 30, 40 years and say, man, 30, 40 years is right. I missed that. I didn't see that. And to me, these prayers is where the magic happens, right? As Scott talked about, it's not making the list doesn't get me any better. Making my grocery list does not fix the problem in my stomach. You know what I mean? And that's, to me, the big difference as I see it between the 4-step in the big book and the 4-step in the 12 and 12 is the prayers. The relief comes in the prayers. And when a new guy asks me to sponsor him, it's very easy, right? We go through this thing like militants, just pretend he knows nothing, because he probably doesn't. But when somebody with a lot of time, or 5 years or 10 years, comes up to me and says, hey, will you sponsor me? I can't make the mistake of knowing, and this is going to sound arrogant, but I can't make the mistake of knowing that he's been through the 4-step the right way, the way the book talks about, right? Because so many people miss this part, and this is where the magic happens. This was our course, so this is a general instruction. This is the route we're going to take. We realized that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Well, I can realize that. But how do I get there? My priest recently said, and a definition of realize I had never heard before. To realize means to bring present, to bring to the present. So I'm bringing to my present consciousness, my present attitude, that perhaps the people who wronged me were spiritually sick. And this is the part that I missed. Though we did not like the symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. T-O-O. So I was spiritually sick, and I was told that I've got a choice to make. I get to ask God for justice for everybody on the planet. Everybody gets justice. Everybody gets what they deserved. I'm not interested in that. I'm really not. I mean, I've only told you half my story. Or mercy for everybody. And that, it was so, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was so childish to think that I can sit back and wish terrible things for you, because that's what I'm doing when I have a resentment, right? I'm looking for God in the world to punish you, to give you what you deserve. But yet, I'm void. I'm excluded from that. I mean, can you think of something more childish? I get forgiveness, but you don't. The world and the people in it, especially in Alcoholics Anonymous, have granted me such grace, such mercy, and such forgiveness. For me to think that you don't get that too, I've missed the whole boat. But how do I get to that spot? And here comes the instruction. And I didn't read it as one. I thought it was just an idea. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So I've got this list of 60, 70, 80, how many ever guys it is. One of my guys set the Maryland world record, and that was 497 guys on his resentment list.
Current standing world record is 1,200.
They're a little bit sicker in Nashville.
I've had that twice.
Right. So I've got this list, and I asked my guy to go down, and we're gonna pray for each one of these people individually. And this is one of the prayers that we say. Right? I know we all like to say in AA that more will be revealed, and I guess that's true. The book doesn't say it. I love to point that out when somebody says that. The book says more will be revealed. No, it doesn't.
What page is that on?
But as Scott points out, it does say that God will disclose more to us, and it's the same thing. And later in something from the peanut gallery.
No, that one just hit. Yeah, let me interrupt for just a second. Jerry said to me, what you really want is mercy for yourself and justice for everybody else. And the package is mercy for everybody or justice for everybody. You are a part of everybody, and you get to choose. and I can't face justice.
That's it. You're out of time. So I'm going to say this prayer. I'm going to say 2 prayers. That's one of them, right? I'm asking God to help me show this person the same pity, tolerance, and patience that we'd grant a sick friend, right? And then there's a second prayer later in the book. So flip with me, page 551. It's worth finding. I know you PhD guys know where this is to memorize it, but follow me here. The middle of 551. And this is a really predictable turn of events. The resentment was against my mother, or my Aunt Martha. It was 25 years old. I had fed it, fanned it, and nurtured it as one might a delicate child. And it became as much a part of me as my breathing. It had provided me with excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacy, and of course, my alcoholism. That was my story with my old man. It was all his fault. And though I really thought I'd been willing to part with it, now I knew I was reluctant to let it go. One morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it. Had is a short word for must. I had to get rid of it, for my reprieve was running out. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. I looked at them. A banner across one of them featured an article by a prominent clergyman. I caught the word resentment. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, pray for the person or thing that you resent, and you will be free. If you ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you'll be free. And this is kind of the shortened version of me that I give my guys. Ask for their health, their prosperity, and their happiness, and you will be free. And this is the kicker. Even when you don't want it, right? And I've started that prayer. God, I don't mean a word of this. But that fool, please give him all the health and prosperity and happiness that you want for him. But they're 2 separate prayers, because one is for me and one is for them. And the book kind of, I think, gives us instruction that we got to get this down before we go forward. Right? Because a little bit further it says, hold on, Scott, I know it's hard for you. Referring to our list again, right, we're going to get to some more work here. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. We resolutely look for our own mistakes. We hear all the time, right? I found my part. It's not what it says. We're looking for where we were at fault. We're looking for our mistakes. But I can't do that while I still have the resentment. It is impossible. And so the book kind of says, hey, before we do this, we're putting out of our minds. And how do we do that? How do we get this resentment out of our mind is this prayer. So we don't go on to what we like to call the 4th column of finding our own mistakes, our own faults, until that's done. Because it's worthless.
My turn?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, this is for me the most powerful exercise I ever went through. My friend Don defined spiritually sick as cut off from God. I'm not going to call on you. I'm going to ask you to do something. Bring to your mind the 1 or 2 worst things you ever did. Got a couple? Weren't you cut off from God when you did that by your own hand? Have you been walking in the sunlight of the Spirit in conscious contact with this loving, laughing God that invented the galaxies and the stars and the duck-billed platypus? Could you have done that? Probably wouldn't have thought of it, right? Yeah. So perhaps these guys were spiritually sick when they wronged me. My beloved talks about realize is heart knowledge. It's different from head knowledge. It becomes real. And John covered it so beautifully. So I've got these 2 prayers. I'm praying for myself. God help me, grant him tolerance, pity, and patience. And then I like to go a lot more detailed than John described on praying for the other guy. Now my newcomer is working on his step 4. He does not have pen in hand. He's doing the prayers. I want 3 30 to 45-minute periods a week, plus I want you praying in the shower, driving the car. I want you in prayer as much as possible. And the more detailed, the better. First name on the list, Tim. God, please help me grant Tim the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And I pray that his hair doesn't fall out, that he gets promoted at work, that he wins the Tennessee lottery, that he gets a new car, that his kids go to school on scholarship and don't give him any trouble, that his wife is a fabulous lover, that his lawn grows lush and green or grows so slowly he only has to mow it once a year. Hang it right out over the edge, man. The more detailed, the better, I think. And then I ask yourself a simple question. Do you mean that, yes or no? Not does your sponsor want you to meet it, not are you trying to meet it, not do you know you're supposed to meet it, do you actually hope all that for him? Yes or no? If the answer is no, go to the next name. If the answer is yes, put a check mark and go to the next name. And we're going to pray this list till they're all checked, and I don't care how long it takes. We use a prayer to close an awful lot of meetings, and one of the phrases in it is, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. I believe that says, God, if I don't forgive them, don't you forgive me. I'm asking to be graded by my own standards. This is just a little bit more important than life or death. I do not want my soul to stand naked in his presence when I move to the other side, guilty of hating one of his kids. And yet, if I could change me, I wouldn't be here. Believe me, the crappie are in shallow water in Tennessee. I would not be here. I can't change me. But what I can change are my actions today. And as I do that day after day after day, I become changed. But I can't change me. And this process can change me. The first guy I worked with that had 1,200 resentments, and I'm not kidding, prayed his list 2.5 times before he checked off his first one. Today, they're all checked. I watched a man forgive the man that murdered his son. Now, if you've got someone that's done more than that to you, you can talk to me about how this won't work, but not until then, because I watched it. I was in the front row on that one. It's going to take some time. It doesn't matter. I think about resentment, this hating other people, as ice around my heart. And what we do with these prayers is I hold this icy heart up to the sunlight of the Spirit. The ice has a thickness based on how severe the events were, how long ago, how much I've nurtured them. And the sunlight has a power based on how close I can hold it and how long. But I'll tell you this, sunlight will melt ice. It's just a question of time. And I don't care how long this takes. And I get, and when you, if you have done what I'm talking about, you're going to understand this. If you haven't, take my word for it. You start through this process and you get to the place where you're checking some names off. People are going to ask you, they're going to see something different. They're going to say, have you lost weight? And the answer is yes. Absolutely. And typically they get down to 4 or 5 that just won't move. The hardest ones are those who are abused as children. Acceptance does not include approval. All right, that was an important lesson for me. Acceptance is when I stop fighting on a heart level something over which I have no power. If you were abused as a child, I absolutely do not approve of that. I think it's horrible. It tears my heart. It just tears my guts up that happened to any child. And you did not deserve it, and that wasn't right. It's never going to be right. And shame on them. And I think that's awful. I want you to know that. But carrying that old anger for them doesn't touch them. It hurts me to release that grip. My father told me, my sister confirmed this not too long ago. He told me several hundred times that I wasn't worth the gunpowder it would take to blow me to hell. He used to tell me that all the time. I look at it today and I can tell you he was trying to motivate me. He saw more in me than I was putting on the road. Do you notice my demeanor didn't change when I just told you that? That's what the gift of forgiveness looks like. I didn't forgive him. I received the gift of not hating him anymore. And this is about opening me up to receive that gift, to hold that icy heart up to the sunlight of the Spirit as long as it takes. Phenomenal, phenomenal experience to get all that stuff dug out and to just be okay with me. But until I get to that place, like John just said, I can't do the rest of this. I can't follow the direction. Because if I still hate you, if I think about you, the hate shows up. And I can't put out of my mind the wrongs that you've done. It's not possible.
Part of that story that I was reading, Freedom from Bondage, that, as I said, this very predictable turn of events. It's a microcosm of my recovery, what's described in there, right? This woman wakes up, she's full of resentment, doesn't know what to do. She prays about it. What does she do? She goes to do some service, right? She was going to the hospital group. What do you think she's talking about? And then the answer appears, right?
It falls out of the sky.
Right. You know, an Eskimo brings it and hits her in the head with it, right? Here's the answer. That's how it's worked for me, right? I got to surrender it, and then I got to get into some action and get out of myself. And you know, this I try to do this every year. Just a quick, kind of recap on my inventory, and I usually do it when I go to see Scott for my anniversary, and we're picking up our chips together. And last year that didn't happen, and the fish are very happy that we weren't there. But so this last year, I've been going through the steps with the guy that was here last year, Harold Long. So actually, it's a little bit longer than that. We're now in our second year going through the steps together. That's how motivated I am. But we're doing this 4-step this last summer, and this is the lesson I want to share with you, because that's how I grow spiritually, right? Is I surrender, I do some inventory, I do some amends, some self-sacrifice. I mean, that's the cycle of growing spiritually. It's not finding that missing nugget in that paragraph of, the Third Testament, that I've now got this figured out. And, for me, there's such a big difference inside my heart between seeking and trying to figure it out. And that's what I've been trying to get across them. But the lesson I got this last year in doing this inventory was I had this resentment against this woman at my work, a single mother, hand to mouth, struggling real hard. I had loaned her $500 to do some work for my little side business. It's been 2 years now, I guess. And, she didn't pay me back. And every time the conversation came up, oh, well, Friday, whatever. Just, how we put people off, right? And she kept putting me off. And I'm getting angry about it. And now I've had it, because I want this money. I'm getting ready to go on vacation. And this was going to be like my throwaway money. And, I wasn't going to get what I want, right? And I'm just dying inside with this thing. Every time I walk into my office now, my blood pressure changes. Every time, this conversation comes up, I'm getting angry. I'm getting blocked off from God. And so I'm sending her, she sends me this text, hey, sorry I didn't get you any money last Friday. And now I'm pissed. And I'm blowing her up on the text. I got one of those big iPhones, and I've got the big blue, maybe 12-inch long text going that takes like a minute to be transmitted. And I'm getting carpal tunnel. How dare you? You have stolen from me. You're taking money out of my kids' mouths. My kids have not missed a meal, okay? And I'm really, but the lesson I got was when I said to her, I said, you are stealing from me. And she said, what happened to me was, God doesn't talk to me, but this inside voice, this outside voice, whatever it was, came to me that was like, if everything is God's, she can't steal from you. Because my wife and I have practiced and believed for a long time that everything is God's. When we went through that terrible situation, we just decided we were going to live that way. I mean, I literally went 2 years without making a mortgage payment when I went bankrupt, during the whole housing crisis. And we got to keep our house. And we just said, the house is God's, whatever happens, happens. We just filled it up with newcomers, stay in the basement, whatever you want. I mean, we were running a little treatment center. It was great. Meetings, whatever. The car's God's, the house is God's, everything is God's. Well, if you start saying that, and if you start believing that, and if you start saying that from the podium, God will take you up on it, right? Like, I mean, he's like, all right, cool, and I mean, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. This isn't mine, And if I had, it doesn't sound like a huge, powerful lesson, but if I hadn't learned that lesson, I wouldn't have gotten the next one. And the next one was last year, right about this time, I had this resentment against my wife's mother. She lived in Myrtle Beach. She used to live here. And I mean, it was one of these 25-year ones. Early in our marriage, she had written me this nasty letter about how I was raising our kids. And she was going to call social services and all this stuff. And, it was in a drunken rage. And because I'm a great dad. And I'm a great dad. And so that made it worse, right? Because it wasn't true. I mean, for the one time, it wasn't true. And so she was dead to me. I mean, that's how I treated her. I mean, we used to go to Myrtle Beach to play golf, me and my buddies, and we'd go play 8 rounds in 4 days. I mean, we did that like 2 or 3 times a year. And my kids, every year, they'd be like, hey, did you stop at Grandma's house? I'm like, nope, didn't stop there. And so like they kept, every year, they asking. And finally, I just told them the truth. I said, listen, I would not stop at your grandmother's house for anything. If I was on fire next to her pool, I would not jump in it, okay? I don't want anything to do with her. And they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And so that's how I felt about her. But what happened was, the transformation that happened in this work was, about this time last year, my wife's mother gets really ill. She goes down to, it was in January, she goes down to Myrtle Beach, picks her up, brings her to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. After a couple of months, it's obvious she's never going back to Myrtle Beach, and she's most likely not going to live very long. And it was in March. My wife called me and she said, "I want to bring my mom home to our house to die." And my heart just said, of course. But normally my instinct would be like, my house? Like, your mother in my house? Like, no. And we got to have this incredible experience watching this woman die in my dining room. A lot of you guys, or some of you guys were at Step Brothers last year. We had this big cookout, and she was there in the dining room, couldn't move, couldn't get out of her bed. And the day before she passed, I made her this beautiful salmon dinner, and all she could talk about was that. And the next day, the day before she died, she told me she loved me. I told her I loved her, and I meant it with all my heart. Just as sick as she was, as crazy as she was, and that wouldn't have happened without this process. It was impossible to happen. I can't think away the resentment. I can't bury it away enough, But if I hadn't learned that little lesson with the woman at my work that everything is God's, right? If I hadn't learned that little one, I couldn't have had the bigger one. Like, all right, bring your mom home, So I have to learn all these little lessons to get the next one.
Thanks, John. Now I get at the top of 67, I get my marching orders from here on. It says, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a silent prayer when you make me mad now. This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And it says, I don't get to retaliate or argue. It says, referring to my list again, putting out of my mind the wrongs others had done, resolutely for own mistakes. I think the most harmful misquote I hear from the book is I look for my part. If I'm looking for my part, somebody else has a part. I'm going to tell you right now who's got the biggest part. Everybody with me on that? I got to get out of the part business. If I've been through this process, prayed these prayers until they worked, there are no parts. We're very simply down to my mistakes, where it had been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened. These are the earmarks of the reemergence of self. Selfish, I want what I want, and don't care whether it affects you or not. Dishonest, I'm willing to lie, cheat, steal to make it happen. Self-seeking, I'm not seeking anything for you ever. Frightened, I have a concern I may not get what I think I wanted sometime in the future. It always comes back to self. That list is all over the book. I just don't have time to go to it, but trust me. So the situation's not been entirely our fault. Disregard the other person involved entirely. It's so important to tell me twice. Right. Where are we to blame? Inventory's mine, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Column 4. What were my mistakes? It's that simple. Next to high school football coach. All right, so I get high school football coach, didn't play me as much as I deserved, affected my self-esteem, personal and sexual relations. I'll tell you that. The guys on the first team doing better with the girls than the guys on the bench were. I'll tell you that. And I get to praying for this guy, and what I discover is that when I went to practice, I didn't practice very hard. And there were guys on the team at my position better than I was. And the simple truth is he probably played me more than I deserved. We checked that one off. Yeah. And then we come to a fear inventory. And I'm going to summarize. We're thin on time. The next paragraph says fear is a bad deal. Next page, it says, am I being too subtle for him, Jake?
Hold on, Scott. A couple of them are writing that down.
Okay, yeah, I'll wait. Yeah, okay. And it says, we reviewed them thoroughly, put them on paper that we had no resentment and connection. So I have the guy turn 5 or 6 pages in his spiral notebook, make a big dog ear so he can find it, and it lists your fears. And a fear is something that grips you. I got into a discussion with a guy many years ago. Guy said he looks both ways before he steps off the curb because he got a fear of being run over by a bus. This guy might have busophobia. I don't know. I look both ways before I step off the curb because I think that's what intelligent human beings do. And it's not having to do with fear. Typically, the typical resentment inventory on the first time, if somebody is really thorough, will run anywhere from a low of about 50. I've only seen a couple in the 50 neighborhood. Very young men who are just not that angry, to a high of 1,200, averaging out at 150 to 300. It's about what I expect to see. If they're shorter than that, I wonder if they were thorough, and I start naming categories. And then fears are run 15 or 20. Fear of failure, fear of success is real common among us. And I think I have a fear of holding a baby. I have a fear of that. I have a fear of dropping a baby. I have to look at the truth about what the real fear is. The fear that you won't like me, fear of death. My fear of death's been gone for quite a while. We talk about that maybe a little later. But just a list of things that you have fears about. And then it says we're on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns. Step 1, Section B. I'm not in management anymore. I'm here to play the role He assigns. This next sentence very subtly gives me permission to make a mistake. To the extent that I do as I think he would have me and humbly rely on him, but as he enabled me to match calamity with serenity. That means when I'm trying to do what I think God wants me to do next, I'm going to make some mistakes. But there'll be that finer quality mistake that we talked about. And then it tells me not to apologize for God twice. And then there's a prayer. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he'd have us not do but be. I thought, I wonder what he would have me be. I found the answer on page 133. And I think it's correct. 133, second line. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And I think anything I can add to that list that fits is within his will for me. How about this? Happy, joyous, free, and trying to be a good dad. Yeah. Happy, joyous, free, and faithful to my lady. Yeah. Happy, joyous, and free, and cheating on my taxes. See if it fits. It says that once we commence to outgrow fear. If I can outgrow fear, I must assume fear is a lack of growth. Spiritual growth is my best guess.
One of the things that Scott glazed over real quick that I love to mention it because it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I think they just put it in the big book about 2 years ago. I hope you guys have a 5th edition big book because that's what mine is. It's like, they just put new stuff in there all the time. My first sponsor used to say that the gremlins would come in the middle of the night and scribble stuff. And I do this especially with the men that I sponsor that I don't like. It says, we asked ourselves why we had these fears. And I say, stop. Now I want you to figure out why you have these fears. Come back to me when you're ready. And some of them, weeks later, I got it all figured out. And of course, the answer is in the next sentence. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? So every time I'm fearful, it's because my computer is analyzing the performance data. And every time I've relied on self, it's just been a train wreck. That's where the fear comes from. And then it talks about what to do with that. That we're on a different basis now. It's reminding us of that new contract we had in the 3rd step. Oh, remember? The rest of your life was none of your business. Remember? God's the director. I don't have to micromanage this situation at work so that I can get that new account. I know that new account was in Steve's territory, and I know he called on them, but I really need that account. So, whatever it is, self-reliance had failed me. That's the basis of all of my fear, it says.
A lady friend of mine told this story. She was standing in line at a bank to cash a check, and all of a sudden there's a hairy arm around her throat and a pistol in her ear. She's a hostage in a bank robbery. She talked about it, and she said that all her fears were in the future. That as she stood there, she was physically quite uncomfortable and not free to go about her business as she would have preferred, but she was really okay. If she could have stayed in the moment by moment, she was always really okay. Her concern was that he would shoot her or that he would kidnap her. Moment by moment, she was really okay. And that was when I got it. My fears are always in the future, without exception. And anytime I'm in the future, I go alone. My God doesn't go to the future with me. Yours may, mine doesn't. So if I'm in fear, what I'm doing is I'm borrowing pain from an unsure future. A friend of mine says worry is just low-grade atheism. Worry is how I tell God I'm absolutely certain that he cannot handle my future. And the answer to my fears is to get back in. Hardest assignment I've ever been given is one day at a time. I saw that, blew that off one day at a time. Yeah, I don't drink today. Yeah, I got it. No, you don't. No, that means live only in this day. All of the good questions contain the word today, and all the good answers contain the word today. And when I get past that, I'm trying to fix the rest of my life. I'd like to read the first couple of sentences in the first paragraph in the chapter, Figuring It All Out. But we don't have that chapter. So I'm not going to be able to do that for you. And what that tells me is it's not my job to figure it all out, and I got to quit trying to fix the rest of my life. The question isn't, what am I going to do about my finances? Wrong question. What am I going to do about my finances today? What do I do about my relationship? What are you going to do about it today? Can you feel how much easier that is? And when I lose the word today, I'm trying to fix the rest of my life. And I'm no good. If I was any good at that, I'd have never met you. I would just fix the rest of my life and been okay. I have to get out of the business of trying to fix the rest of my life. And fear is what drives most of that. And it's just low-grade atheism. I think we ought to run on. We started late. By the way, if if you don't have a tendency to be punctual, you might want to give that some consideration for the rest of this weekend. It would be nice, I think, to start on time. We have a lot to cover.
This paragraph here that reminds us of that contract gives us, I used to think this paragraph was, Bill put it in the wrong place, right? This is the third step stuff, but it's because I forget what I believe.
Yeah.
Because we're now on a new basis, it says. And basis in the 1935-39 dictionary says a fundamental principle. So this is going to be now our new fundamental principle. We're on the basis of trusting and relying upon God. And it gives us the terms again. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns. Right? And this is the part that got me. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. And that's what I always wanted. I can match success with serenity. That's pretty good, right? It's easy to be happy, joyous, and free when you go to the bank, cashing the big check, old lady's waiting at home for you, nice romantic dinner, everything is good, right? But when stuff's hitting the fan, how do I act? And that was, my biggest problem, matching calamity with serenity. And I thought calamity was just drama. But in that same dictionary, I looked it up, calamity says, a cause that produces evil. A little bit different than just some drama. Are you going to go into the...
Yeah, I think we should. We were almost 10 minutes late starting, and I think we need to put a full hour in.
And this...
They're going to break the bank? That's good.
This is the part that when I went off on that tangent earlier on about doing this with a sponsor that was so important to me, and Scott talked about, hiding your four-step, was true. When I was doing this work again at 17, 18 years, and putting my life back together, I'm coaching my son's football team, and back then they allowed us to drive on the field, and I've got my notebook, I'm doing my four-step of work, I'm on my sex inventory, and we're on the football field, and this do-gooder mom comes up and she's like, hey, I'm going to take everyone's name down, emails and phone numbers so we can manage. And I'm coming about 50 yards away or something. I can hear her talking. She's like, does anybody have any paper so I can write down the names and numbers? My son's like, yeah, there's a green spiral notebook in the back seat. And I look over, I go, green spiral notebook. That sounds familiar. And I look over and they've got my four-step on the hood of the Jeep. And they're flipping through, My son's like, donkey, sheep, like Steve, what's on this for? And you've never seen a white guy run so fast. I was just like, no. I say that's funny, but I've known two cases of it now. When Joe and Scott came and led Step Brothers, Joe got off the plane and there was like 400 messages for him, and he was like, man, I got to call this guy back. I'm sorry. And he calls him back, and it was like this: hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, she found it? Oh, and she read it. Your stuff is outside? Oh, I'm sorry. The key doesn't work in the lock anymore? That's how important that is, and especially with this part of the inventory. And same thing happened with a guy that's in this room, and fortunately, he said, same thing exactly happened. I was at dinner, I turned my phone back on, there's 36 messages, and I was like, oh man. Called him back, and he said, she found it, she read it. And then kind of what he found out over the period of a couple of days was, it was so boring, she stopped reading it. So she let him stay. So, but this is where, in talking about sponsorship, that tangent that I went off on earlier was about, I need a good sponsor, especially during this part of the inventory. And this is why I don't sponsor women. I heard a couple guys talk about last night, I sponsor men and women, and you like it, I love it. For me, this is where the big differences come in this inventory. Is, I'd really like to hear Barbie's fifth step, but it might not be good for her. You know what I mean? I don't know what it's like to be a woman in that sense, and that's why I have a sponsor of the same sex. I think in my area, there's enough solid women that can sponsor her. But go ahead.
Okay. I'm only going to take a couple of minutes. I'm on a high spot here, page 69. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. And then here's one of the two questions we're going to answer here. What can we do about them? So we're not here to beat me up. It says we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom have we hurt? unjustifiably aroused jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. Where we had fault, what should we have done instead? It says we got this all down on paper. I looked at it. It does not tell me how to get it down on paper. I want you to know I think there are an awful lot of really good ways to do exactly what's in this book. My mentor Don did it in sentence form. I saw one of his 4 steps. He showed it to me. And he had about 3 or 4 lines where he would write about each specific instance. I'm kind of fond of the column inventory, and since it didn't tell me how, I take a very little bit of poetic license to use whom had I heard for a first column. Selfishness, dishonesty, and inconsideration is a second column. Those were my tools, as were jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness, column 3. And column 4 is what should I have done instead? Or where was I at fault? What should I have done instead? And I'm going to share with you my 4th column. Mine only has 3 entries. They appear in a number of places. And they are, I should have told her the truth, I should have left her alone, or I should have told him no. I'm a heterosexual male. There's no question about it. I had my last homosexual experience when I was 19 years old. I never liked it. But my father, my best analysis is that my father had beaten me down so much I could not tell anybody no for any reason. I was 19 years old. I ask you to notice again, my demeanor did not change as I just got through telling you that. That the purpose of these things is to be able to share them. I've heard way over 100 fifth steps. I've only heard 2 that did not have a homosexual experience of some kind from heterosexual males. I've sponsored a couple of homosexual guys whose biggest problem was where they tried to have heterosexual relationships, and it torqued them up something terrible. So I'm not judging anybody. I'm simply telling you the very simple thing is that if that's the one that you got that's killing you and you can't talk to anybody about it, catch me this weekend. I'd be a pretty good choice. So we get that on paper, and then it tells me what I'm trying to do. It says in this way we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. That's my mission here. Subject each relation to this test. We're back to selfishness again. He says we ask God to mold our ideals. Holy mackerel, we're going to talk to God about sex. Who did you think invented it? Nice job. We ask God to shape our ideals and help us to live up to them. So I'm going to ask him to do that. We just sit quietly in God's presence and ask him for an ideal. Now let me clarify. The ideal does not have anything to do with how tall she is, what color her hair is. All right? It is not about that. The ideal is with reference to your conduct, given your current situation. Like if you're single, I don't need to know what it would be if you were married but temporarily separated but not legally separated, but you thought she had a boyfriend but you weren't sure. Okay, we don't need that one today, Stanley. We just need, given your current situation today, what do you think God would have you do / not do in this category? Pretty simple. And I want you to read it to me. And some of these need some work, some of them don't. And it goes on to say that I've got to be willing to grow toward these ideals, to make amends where I've done harm. That's the second time in the 4th step it's told me that I'm going to have to make amends where I've done harm. Sounds a lot like step 8. On the top of page 70, it says if I keep hurting people in this category, I'm going to drink, and that ain't maybe. Is to sum up, we earnestly pray. We're going to talk to God about sex a lot. Guidance in each questionable situation, sanity, the strength to do the right thing. If it's troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. The number 1 prescription in this book that I can find is help others. I got a problem, I go help you, my answer falls out of the sky on me. It's a predictable sequence of events.
I'm not a professor like Scott is, but like I don't know of anywhere in the instructions where it says to do something 3 times, right? And here he tells us 3 times about this ideal. And I, like Scott said, I asked my guy to write a couple of sentences, and I'm going to share with you what mine is. My sex ideal is that I want to be an honest, selfless, that's the tough one, an honest, selfless, considerate lover to my wife. I want to give her all, it's a tough word, all of my sexual attention and energy. Oh, what an order, I can't go through with it, right? But that is the ideal that came to me from praying, right? So that covered, and it grew, right? I mean, that covers, if I'm looking at something on the internet, I'm not giving my wife sexual energy. It's going somewhere else, you know what I mean? And I can't emphasize enough how many people I've seen skip on this part and it come back to haunt them.
The last paragraph at the bottom of page 70 is what pilots call a checklist. says we've been thorough about our personal inventory. We've written down a lot. If you've written down everything where we said to write, you've never done what I refer to as the actual 4-step, which is the one very cleverly concealed in the pages of this book. You'll have written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments. I remember we covered that. Remember the list? There was a lot of analysis. Begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. Yeah, I remember we killed me 7 times on 1 page. Commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. Yeah, we did that. Learned tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, or look on them as sick people. Yeah, I remember we covered that. We've listed people we hurt by our conduct and willing to straighten out the past if we can. We found at the end of the resentment inventory and just on the preceding page. So I'd propose to you, if you've done what somebody else told you was a 4-step, and you can't say, yes, you did all of this, you might want to try this one. It was life-changing. For me, this step work is about digging the poison out of my soul so that who I really am can blossom and grow. But you got to get the poison out first, and this is the beginning. Anything else on 4? I'll take just a couple of minutes and move on. 5th step, kind of important. It says here for about 3 pages.
I think we should break. We're about almost an hour and 10 in.
Well,
Come back
we
5, 6, and 7 next.
we started. I'm only going to be a second here.
Oh.
All right.
I'll give you 10.
You're too sweet. You're so sweet. You almost gave me a cavity. You got to remember this portion of the work. This stuff was written before there were sponsors on every corner. There's a powerful piece on page 74. The last paragraph begins, notwithstanding, count up 3 lines. It says, the rule, there are no rules in AA. Here's the first one. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves but considerate of others. That carries nicely into step 9, too, and actually 10 and 11. And there are an awful lot of ways to approach this. There's a school in AA that says you read the guy your 4-step. I'm not of that school. If that's what you're doing, that suits me fine. It says on page 75, we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark crane of the past. It's a confession. And I don't let him schedule his 4-step until he's complete, his 5th, till he's finished 4. Don't want to let you bash yourself into finishing 4 because you got 5 schedules. It's a bad mindset. And we sit down, we got a place, we got tissue, we got bathroom, we got water, phones are off. We're going to pray and invite God into this process. And as quick as we come out of the prayer, I'm going to say to him, tell me now the single worst thing you ever did. I want it right now. And I asked him actually before we started, are you nervous? If this is his first 5th step and he's not nervous, we're wasting our time. He already knows what he ain't going to tell me. If he's nervous, he's either decided to tell me or he's not sure. I work with either one of those. But if he's not nervous, we're wasting our time. And I say, I want the worst thing you ever did right now. And then they give it to me. And then I tell them when I did that. And the odds are very good. I want your next worst thing. I tell him when I did that. We do that till he can't think of any. And then I allowed him to check his 4-step, see if we missed anything. When we finish that, I read him the 5th step promises here. I tell him that I forgive him. I believe God forgives him. And I believe by the time he finishes his 9th step, he will have forgiven himself, which is for me, that's where that forgiveness part comes. And then I send him home to do the second half of step 5, which is for an hour. I tell him about half the time you're going to think of something. About half the guys doing the first 5th step will come up with something within the next 48 hours they just missed. Just call me. Not a big deal. And then it says that we do step 6 the same day. If we can answer our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. Very cleverly concealed prayer in step 6. If we cling to something, we'll not let go. We ask God to help us be willing. And then when we're ready, we say this prayer. And I would note in the short form of step 7, it looks like I'm asking God to take them all. In the prayer, I'm not. Just the ones that stand in the way of my usefulness. Kind of an interesting perception, I think. I would propose that why don't we close this session with the 7-step prayer. Let me tell you, we're going to need to talk to everybody in the cafeteria.
We'll make that announcement. We got 2 we got to make. So.
You got a couple to make right now? You want us to do the prayer or you want to do the announcements?
Do the prayer and then we'll do 2 announcements.
If y'all, those who are so inclined, like to join me in the 7-step prayer. Prayer, my Creator, I'm now willing that you have all of me, good and bad, and pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to thee and to others. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do thy bidding.
All right, so gentlemen, everybody, whether you eat your lunch